Goodbye to 2023. I've got a new sketchbook to draw in. Let's go. Hello, my moon and stars. Happy New Year! As Christmas has gone and passed with gifts abound, I'm sure most of you must be dying to get back into drawing. I'm here to draw in my new sketchbook and tell you guys how I draw from references. While Pinterest isn't perfect and is more ads than pins at this point, it's still a really great place to find people and images you've never found yourself before. A user and fellow artist that I follow is Aruseli. Her Pinterest is beautifully and intricately categorized, and I highly recommend popping by to see what she has saved. There's a lot of interesting poses and references to just things that I haven't even found on Pinterest beforehand. And I've been on Pinterest for many years. But Pinterest is the perfect place to go down a rabbit hole of just image after image after image until you don't even remember where you started, but you leave a path somewhere. And that's how I love finding my references to draw from. For my first sketchbook spread and my New Year's resolution, I'm making it a goal this year to do more studies. In general, honestly. So here's how I go about using references in studies and art. I have a small folder in Pinterest for pose references, and I have them sorted into some categories. I have one for poses in motion, with instruments, with, actresses or models that have weight to them, with two or more people, perspective. I garner a general vibe of the pose I want to draw, and I go looking for it, such as, do I want to draw someone who is standing? Do I want to draw someone who is sitting? And I go from there. I start with my pencil sketch because I'm also warming up for the day, and usually you should warm up before you start drawing, but I don't listen to the rules because I break them all the time. So these aren't super intended to be polished. When I'm generally happy with the sketch, I start going in with colored pencils before my line art, or at least in this one I did. Now, to speak more specifically about the reference, why did I choose it? I'm sure many artists have heard the words like dynamic and composition and whatever, but aren't really sure how that applies to a pose. When you're just starting out using references, it's really hard to understand sometimes what another artist might say as this pose is dynamic. Why do they find it dynamic? And it's always really hard to explain, I guess, and I'm gonna try my best to tell you guys what I'm looking for in a pose. When I'm in a mood to draw, I think to myself, do I want triangles? Do I want soft curves? Do I want to draw lines? And then I try to find a pose that matches that, like I said, vibes. This first pose, the blue one, had a lot of triangles, such as the empty space by her arms and the triangle that's made by her legs when she crosses them over. I also wanted to draw a lot of lines, and so in her pose, in her reference, her crossed legs makes the fabric have a lot of lines and folds, and that is what I wanted to draw in this moment. So I went looking through my references and my sitting references, because if someone's sitting in a dress, they tend to have a lot of lines, and probably some triangles, so I go looking, and that's how I choose my references half the time. For the most part, I try to eyeball my proportions using landmarks on the reference to gauge. If her elbow is level with her eyes, I need to make sure that her arm goes out far enough for that to work. I don't always get proportions correct, but I do use my artist eye to move limbs and lines in a way that makes you think it looks correct. When it comes to more difficult poses, or ones that I have not practiced that often, such as this girl who is going to eventually be colored in red, I look for curves that can help me with that. I noticed that a little pudge of her stomach comes out just a little bit further down than the bottom of her elbow region, so I kind of gauge where that exactly is going to be. The top of her thigh that is more crossed over in front is roughly where I drew it at the top of her wrist. So I did make her arm that is more posed out, as you see, a little shorter than I should have. I'm blaming that on Pinterest because I couldn't see where her hand exactly was, because some pins are a little too long-wise. So I'm blaming it. It's not on me. Don't worry about it. But for her reference, why I chose it is because I really loved her stomach area. I loved the curve that came with it. And in that moment, I wanted to draw curves. So I looked for people in my weight folder, and I looked for ones that had curves that I thought to myself, I want to draw that. I want to put that in my sketchbook. And she's the first one I found that I liked. As far as dynamic or composition works, for composition, I start with one, and I start with like one pose, and I try to build every reference I use after that to fit on the page next to that pose. So this next one, I could have drawn her standing. I didn't, because I wanted another sitting pose, so I found a pose that would work well being crammed into the corner of the page over here. I usually look at outlines to see if I'm gonna like a pose or not. For this one, she had a lot more triangles, a lot of lines, she had barely any curves, and so that worked well with what I wanted at the moment. And as I said, I kind of guess where my proportions are going to be. It's hard to tell, but I've taken a lot of, well, it's not hard to tell, but, bad wording. I've taken a lot of figure study classes at this point, and I've drawn hundreds of figures. So at this point, my artist eye and my intuition for bodies and how they work has kind of evolved since past needing to draw the body first before the clothing. I'm kind of at a point where I just do it myself, and I guess where it's supposed to be, I guess. Whenever I'm doing a more in-depth studies like this, where I focus on shading as well as the pose, I like to change up my methods from each one that I do. For all of these, I started with a pencil sketch, but for blue, I colored her shadows and then gave her lines. For red, I lined her first, and then I kind of colored her in. And for green, I color blocked her out entirely, and used colored pencils for the shading, to darken her colors and her contours, and then I gave her line art. Changing my methods from each and every pose helps me stay critical about the reference, and helps me not just get into a lull of drawing figure after figure, if that makes sense. And also, sometimes I get lazy. The shoes were not accurate, and I didn't feel like drawing them in, so I outlined them the best I could. They ended up chunky, and I colored them in black and called it a day. And we've changed angles. Please excuse the lighting. I filmed almost all of this at night, and I didn't have a lot of light in the living room. Where I'm at right now, it gets like pitch black at 6 o'clock, and I hate it. I want more daylight, because I only start feeling like I want to draw at like 3 or 4 or 6. But regardless, when it came to this pose, I was once again in the mood for a lot of triangles, and I wanted yet another sitting pose. I love my sitting poses. When it comes to studying, I tend to put the heads in a sort of rectangle format instead of a usual circle, so when I'm not pencil sketching first, I go straight into marker. I try to imagine a little rectangle box for me to draw the face in. I draw the triangular fold in the sleeve, and I use the surrounding parts to get the scale of this drawing. The triangle fold in her sleeve helps me figure out the width of her arm, like, the little elbow joint, and I billow out her shirt to find her stomach and waist. Wherever I put her hand resting is where her bottom needs to match. I follow the lines as best as I can, and I kind of just remember all of the other poses that I've drawn that are similar to this, and I pull out the knowledge from there. Her shoes were really fun to draw in this. I need to do more work on studying shoes as well. I just never find interesting enough shoes, but I looked at the lines that they have, the curves, and I tried to follow them. And I only kind of regret drawing her other leg, but it turned out good, so I'm not that mad about it. And my partner wanted to give me a little doodle while I was working.
CapCut deleted my recording. So anyways, I'm going on record again to say that I was invited to do a little doodle in Mob's sketchbook, in which I drew us kissing because we are in love. Because what better to do? And it looks fantastic, and it was a wonderful addition. You're welcome.
And you totally didn't forget that you're left-handed.
I forget sometimes.
I had to change angles for you.
Yeah. Okay. That's all. We're in love. Bye.
Thank you. For this red figure, I wanted curved lines, and I did unfortunately forget to save this picture when I drew it. But as always, I started with her face, and particularly her glasses, to figure out the proportion of, how big her face is going to be. And I used her hair to also figure out the height and the width of what I would need other things to places. Surprisingly, a lot of the surrounding lines near her face were pretty vital to figuring out the proportions for this. Her shoulder was raised up to the chin, the bottom of her sleeve needed to be higher than the bottom of her fold, but sometimes, I skew proportions to also make them fit on the page, because as long as you know the rules, you can break them, so break the rules I did indeed. This one was really fun. I was mostly really excited to draw her legs, which was the curved lines I was really excited about, but I colored in her hair, and I put some little extra bits, and I get started on the next one. Whenever I start with the eyes, I like to carve out the face using the hair, if I'm able to. It provides me with the ear, the jawline, the neck, which helps as I move further down this body. For this figure, her hand was on her cheek, so I was able to draw in her sleeve, and use however long I made the banding of the sleeve to measure where her collar of her sweater needed to sit, and thus, her other shoulder. I have also, honestly, I have no clue if this makes sense, by the way. I sure hope it does. This was just really a really quick video, but I had a lot of fun drawing in my new sketchbook and just figuring things out. I did go back and, fill out the page a little more, and I did that while forgetting to film it, so apologies there. For the two figures on the left, I sketched them out in pen first and then colored them in. I did do 3 rounds of figure drawing, but I forgot to film this one, so I'm very sorry, but it was all with markers instead of pencil, and then of course here's this one. The purple didn't show up that great, so I cut that part out, but here's a close-up of everything that I drew. I want to give a special thank you to my patrons, Din Din with Him, A. Hartley, Otokanoto, Octopus Lion, and Cinnamon Spiders. $1 gets your name at the end of my videos, $3 gets special ups and artwork before I show them to the public, and $5 gets early video access. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel into the new year. That's all I have to say. Bye! Good luck with your sketchbooks.